The conversation presented by the Living History Interpreters does not reflect the views of AARP or Crispus Attucks York.
Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, born September the 24th, 1825, just south of the Mason-Dixon line in Baltimore, Maryland. I was born into a race whose inheritance was wrong and outrage and anger. I spent the entirety of my life battling against those. My weapon of choice, my sword, was the pen and the podium. I wrote, I was a poet, I was an abolitionist, a suffragette, a champion for your human rights and equity.
Good day. My name is Lydia Hamilton Smith, born in Gettysburg and moved to Lancaster, where I became a businesswoman and business partner to Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, where we also assisted freedom seekers on their journey to freedom.
My name is William Goodridge, station master on the Underground Railroad and businessman in York, Pennsylvania. I was born in 1806. My mother worked on the Carroll plantation. Mr. Carroll was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. When she was with child, he sent her to Baltimore, so I was actually born in Baltimore. At the age of 6, they took me across the Mason and Dixon line into York County to learn tanning with a Reverend and Mrs. Dunn. I lived in this property for about 30 years.
My name is Harriet Lee Smith. I was born Christmas Day in 1797, a child of enslavement. In 1816, my beloved Reverend Stephen Smith purchased his freedom and then purchased my freedom, and we were married in 1816. Together we became conductors on the Underground Railroad and prolific business owners. To further support our freedom-seeking brothers and sisters who were charged under the Fugitive Slave Act, we created a fund to pay attorneys to fight for their freedom in the courtroom.
Hello, I'm Basil Biggs, sometimes known as Dr. Basil Biggs, as I received my license to practice veterinary medicine after petitioning the state of Pennsylvania. I was born in 1819 in Carroll County, Maryland, and there my mother passed away while I was 4 years old, and I was given to another family. I learned to work the long shores of Maryland. Then I met my wife Mary. We were married and had children in the 1840s. But I heard about the opportunity for our children to get an education like their white counterparts, and so in 1858, my wife and I moved to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
I am so happy that we were spirited back once again to talk about the Underground Railroad and the work that we did. You know, we've been doing this for a while, you know, and we thank those people for spiriting us back. This is like a reunion.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
To open this up, I'd like to hear just a little of the tunes that we are used to hearing back during our time. Mr. Biggs, could you just give us something?
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Yes.
He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of a terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Oh, glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Yes, that makes me feel good. What about it?
Yes, yes, yes.
It puts us back into that
Yes.
spirit, back to our
Yes.
time.
Yes, indeed. Giving our God glory.
Yes.
Spirit
Yes.
of the truth marching on.
The truth.
Marching on.
Hallelujah.
Yes, yes.
And speaking of the truth, let's talk about that 13th Amendment.
Well, I should say the 13th Amendment, having worked with and for Congressman Stevens, he worked very hard, 13th Amendment, to give our people their freedom. It was something very dear to him because he understood, as he was judged so often by his physical afflictions, and he saw how we were judged, just based on the color of our skin, that we had that right to be free as everyone else.
Yes, that was the abolishment of slavery, wasn't
Yes.
it?
Yes, it was.
Well, what do you think, Mr. Biggs?
Well, I counted the privilege to have been born below the Mason-Dixon line, but yet I had certain freedoms. You know, my mother died when I was just 4 years old, but she taught me to have a vision, I guess you could say, to want to be educated. She left me $400, and so when I got to Gettysburg in 1858 with my wife and children, we became a station for freedom seekers who were coming from Maryland. And of course, we know about that 1850 Fugitive Slave Act that kept a lot of people on guard. But I was grateful that I had power to, I guess you could say, to purchase my own land and use these hands as a veterinarian. So we were always on edge. But thank God
Yes.
for that 13th Amendment.
That reminiscing always makes me feel grand. You know, I lived in this home for about 30 years. And it makes me feel good when I am back here because of all the people that have come through, the freedom seekers that have come through. And that brings me to think about that 14th Amendment.
We were all bound up in this here thing together.
Yes.
Like you, my dear brother, I was born south of the Mason-Dixon line in Baltimore.
Yes.
And in 1850, that is what drove me here. Because of fearing for my freedom. Although I was born a free person,
Yes.
I was still at any time
At any time.
at risk of being captured and sold into enslavement
That's right.
Yes.
and treated like I wasn't a human.
Yes.
So the abolishment of slavery is what I fought for, what we all did. But then to be freed is one thing, but
Yes.
truly free, moving on, is the 14th Amendment, giving us a citizenship. Well,
Yes.
but that was only a piece of the puzzle. And there was still work to do, which for us women and those men
Yes.
who were on our side, we began to really explore and push the need for women to vote.
Yes, that 13th Amendment and that 14th Amendment, those two stand together.
Yes.
The abolishment of slavery and then getting that citizenship being thought of as a person. But Miss Harriet Smith, what is your thoughts on either the 13th or the 14th Amendment? We know that Stephen was a pastor or a reverend. What were you thinking?
Well, my dear Mr. Goodridge, I was a child of enslavement. I was enslaved until I was 19 years old. And it was only because my beloved Reverend Stephen Smith purchased my freedom shortly after he purchased his own. So when I think about the 13th Amendment, I had received my freedom before it was ratified. And that was when my beloved Stephen and myself together became conductors on the Underground Railroad in Columbia, Pennsylvania. So the 13th Amendment reminds me of two lives. My life as an enslaved woman and my life as a wife and a partner to a free man in my own freedom.
Yes.
It's always make me feel warm when I see some of the strides that we made during our time, because I was also born in Baltimore. I was born enslaved as well.
Yes.
Yes.
And I ended up with all of this.
Yes.
So there were times where I was able to feel like a man, like a real person. And during that time, that was quite difficult for many of us.
Yes, it was.
Indeed.
Well, you know, Mr. Goodrich, there's always a law within a law.
Yes.
And by that I mean even with the Declaration of Independence, which declared that all men were created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. It wasn't rights for all people. It was stated as such, but not for all. And then even when we look at the ratification of the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment in particular, where states were not supposed to continue to enslave Negroes. However, they were indeed still in slavery. Even in the state of Pennsylvania, there were those who utilized the bodies and the services of Negro people. And so there's always been a law within a law, but thank God for those who continue to press and to push, like Harriet and Tubman and Frederick Douglass and all those. Just one made the difference, and so we all can benefit from.
Which is why I always link the 13th and 14th Amendment together.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, in reading the papers of the day, and one of the good things about being spirited back is that we get a chance to see what people are doing today.
Yes.
And how different things are compared to our time. But as I read these papers, I don't see that much difference in the action.
Yes.
The words may be different, but I don't necessarily see the difference. How do you feel about that when you're spirited back?
I do see that, and it concerns me. I was blessed having been born free and then under the guardianship of Congressman Stevens. The 14th Amendment was supposed to grant us equal rights under the law, equal
Yes.
protection under the law. It did not. And I fear that as I see today, that seems to stand. They do not have equal protection under the law.
Except on paper.
Yes.
Whenever a law is written, whenever legislation is ratified, it must be enforced. And what we found in our day, and clearly as it is today, the laws that protect our freedom, that protect our equality and our citizenship must be enforced. And even as it was in our day, we must tirelessly fight for
Indeed.
that enforcement.
Indeed.
Yes. And I think we did our parts,
Indeed.
given the time.
Yes.
Which leads me to talk about the 15th Amendment. Now, I know the ladies are not quite that fond of the 15th Amendment only as our support.
Yes.
Having a right like that and not including the women,
Yes.
how did you feel about that? And I'm always reading about voting spirited back. How did you feel about it?
When the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, thanks to Octavius Cato and other men who fought for voting rights, that women were still there within the struggle. You still had Sojourner Truth, who was in the company of Lucretia Mott and others who were still pushing for the right to vote for all men and women. And so I know that her agitation, along with the agitation of other women like Frances Harper, as she traveled from Baltimore and Pennsylvania and Ohio and meeting with John Brown and others, she too, her voice was being heard, maybe silently, maybe not out front, but their voices were right along. We just happened to be given the privilege by law, but they too were a part of our advancement in terms of having the right to vote.
Ms. Harper, how did you feel about the 15th Amendment, knowing what we know today, that there was a 19th Amendment?
My time, the 19th Amendment was a distant dream, a mere slim possibility. After the abolition of slavery, I became a full-fledged suffragist.
Yes.
I linked arms with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all of the greats that the history books talk about today. But then there was a defining moment. I remember at the Women's Annual Rights to Vote convention when I was asked to speak
Yes.
and talk about agitating. I had to make a decision going into that convention that the white women did not want black women to vote. And now that it was gaining in momentum and attention, and that there was a possibility not too far off, not in the never ever, there was a possibility that women could possibly vote. The white women decided black women weren't important enough, that we weren't equal enough, and that they did not want to share whatever power they might get by the right to vote with black women. So, with that speech I gave, which you can find now on those information machines you use,
Yes.
but I remember challenging them and them dead in the eye, the white women,
Mhm.
to tell them, you do not speak for me.
Yes.
And you all speak of rights, but I speak of the wrongs that have been inflicted upon the black men. And I center or call out, as you say in this time, the wrongs and of what is happening. As we are not included, black women were not to be included. So my husband died after just 4 years of marriage. And so I would have loved to have been able to say, I'm standing here for just my husband.
Mm.
Yes.
Or even the black male, but the truth is, many of the black men did not like how vocal and agitating I was.
Mhm.
Yes, indeed.
Shame on us.
My dear
Indeed.
brother, Douglas,
Yes.
Ah.
but he implored me to make a decision. Would it be standing with women who do not want you, or standing with your brothers, standing with the black men? Because two of them could not exist in the same plane.
Yes.
Mm.
So, black women, which the history books that I see now don't, it's not listed how powerful that movement was, and how, just like it was the black men who were a force to win that Civil War, the black
Indeed.
women were the force to actually propel the passing of the 19th Amendment.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Mr. Biggs,
How?
we have been not scolded, but schooled.
Vision. Why?
You work so closely with Stephen. I know that you had an opinion on that as well.
Oh, indeed. How can we as a people even imagine full citizenship, equality, even though that was what some people call today a dirty word?
Yes.
How can we imagine that? How can we imagine true freedom without both men and women
And women.
having the right to vote?
Indeed.
There is a playwright. She is back in the spirit realm. I pass by her from time to time. Her name is Bea Richards.
Yes.
Brilliant playwright. I enjoy conversation with her. And there is a term that she coined, pink slavery.
Now, what exactly is that?
Pink slavery is the form of slavery that white women endured while black women were enslaved. And it is also a condition of the mind.
Yes.
And as our dear sister, Ms. Harper, spoke about her experience, white women were still bound in their pink slavery. And there was no way that women would ever have the right to vote without the freed black women
Yes.
who were fighting alongside them. When we were set free, when we received our freedom, we were not only physically freed, but our minds were freed.
Yes.
And we had a strong, solid understanding of what it means to be a citizen and a full human being in the
Yes.
United States,
Indeed.
even in spite of the fact that we did not receive the right to vote at the time that our men did.
Yes.
But that did not keep us from fighting even before the history books decided that they were going to document, if they documented at all, the organizing that black women did, the organizing that we did in our parlors, in our church basements. When we were teaching our children to read, that was one of the things I used to do.
Well, Miss Smith, thank you for lending that term pink slavery. I never thought about that. I learn something every time we come together. Every time we have a reunion.
Yes, sir.
We must continue to do this from time to time.
Yes.
And while reading the papers, we know about the 19th Amendment, and we know about the 15th Amendment. We know about the 13th and 14th. But let's share with each other how it may be affecting the people today.
Well, when as you have been doing much of the time as we've been spirited back, is reading, literacy. I believe it was Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you will forever be free. And so our young children today, our youth, they have to hear the stories that we're telling, know our stories of how we persevered. We were not always wearing these fashions. We came from another place, but it was through perseverance and for caring for one another as a family. You know that in our even pre-colonial culture in Africa, we worked together. There was a word I learned called Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
I'm okay if you're okay. If I'm not okay, you're not okay. I am because we are, and we are because I am. And so that has sustained us throughout the year. And so we have to tell our young people the stories when they have a story.
So, speak it, write it, and then live it. One of the things that
And they said that our power is in our story and in our vote.
That most of what they do today only happened because someone voted.
Yes, yes.
So when you have that opportunity to go inside that voting booth and vote, you are as equal to anyone else that goes into that booth. It is the only place that I can guarantee you full equality.
Yes.
Indeed, equal ground.
Yes.
I cannot promise you that in a school. I cannot promise you that in a hospital. I can't even promise you that at home. But I promise,
Yes.
if you go into that booth and vote, you are as equal to every individual that went into that booth to vote. We have a special opportunity, all of us, when we are spirited back, to share our wisdom. When we come together, hopefully yearly or sometimes shorter, that be our next mission. Being free. Well, like always, I love to host you in my home. I truly do. Things have changed a little bit, but this was a safe house then, and it is still a safe house. So I was just wondering if we would all just join hands